The marine industry is facing a shock it never planned for. Over 2 million boats rejected in less than 2 years. Not because people stopped loving boating, but because the economics stopped loving them back. Interest rates jumped. Insurance skyrocketed. Technology failures piled up. And what was supposed to be the biggest boating boom in a generation is now unraveling one refund at a time. Stay with this, because by the end, you will see why this refund wave is not a glitch, and why some people think it is only the first swell of something bigger. How a single number broke the illusion. Inside dealer meetings and manufacturer conference calls, people danced around the number for as long as they could. They talked about increased cancellations, elevated returns, and higher volatility in demand. Then, someone finally said it clearly: more than 2 million boats. That figure includes center consoles built for offshore runs, pontoons for quiet lakes, wake boats, cruisers, small aluminum fishing rigs, and big fiberglass towers that were supposed to live at marinas for decades. Many were already financed, titled, and delivered. Some never left the yard. At first, every side pointed at someone else. Dealers blamed banks for tightening marine loans. Banks blamed the central bank for raising rates. Manufacturers blamed storms, supply chain chaos, and fickle consumers. Buyers blamed everyone at once. But when you strip away the excuses, the pattern is simple and uncomfortable. The monthly cost of owning a boat changed so fast that buyers realized, sometimes just weeks after taking delivery, that the math no longer worked. When they tried to unwind the dream they had just purchased, they discovered the industry was never built for a mass reversal. For years, buying a boat was not mysterious. You walked into a dealership, climbed on a few models, argued over options, knocked the sticker down a little, and then either wrote a check or signed a loan. Interest rates hovered around 4 to 6%. Terms often stretched 10 to 15 years. Insurance for a typical family boat sat a little above $1,000 a year. Slip fees at a mid-priced marina were annoying but manageable. If you bought a 25-foot center console for $60,000, you expected that in 2 years, assuming you kept it clean and did the basic services, it might still be worth around $50,000. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more. But the direction felt clear, and the slope felt gentle. That predictability made people brave. They stretched. They took on a few $100s more in monthly payments than felt comfortable, because they believed two things: the payment would not change much, and if life did change, they could always sell the boat and not be destroyed financially. It was never perfectly rational, but it worked well enough that millions of boats changed hands without drama. Then, the number that quietly supported that whole belief system started to move. When cheap money vanished and the debt surfaced. Between the early years of the decade and the middle of the decade, the cost of borrowing money moved faster than most boat buyers had ever seen. Marine loans that had been quoted around 4% in the year before the health crisis suddenly showed up at 8%. By the time some of the pandemic-era orders reached delivery, buyers with average credit scores were staring at offers in the double digits. Take that same $60,000 boat. At 4% over 15 years, the payment lands in the low 400s per month. It is uncomfortable, but possible if you cut back on a few restaurant meals and delay that new RV or truck upgrade. Push the loan to 12% and the payment jumps into the low 700s. That extra $330 every month adds up to more than $4,000 a year. For many households, that is not a small tweak. It is the line between having a cushion and living on the edge, and the loan was only the first surprise. Insurance companies, looking back at years of storm damage, flooding claims, theft rings targeting outboards, and marinas hammered by storm surges, reset their assumptions. Policies that had cost around $1,200 a year became $3,000 or more, even for boats that never left inland lakes. Marina slip fees climbed as property taxes rose. Fuel costs marched higher. Registration fees edged up in coastal states. The buyer, who had built a simple spreadsheet when they placed an order in 1 year, suddenly found that every number in that sheet was wrong by the time the boat existed. Some tried to swallow it. Others looked at the total and quietly panicked. If that was all that had changed, the industry might have muddled through with more discounting and longer terms. But there was another domino falling behind the scenes at the dealer level, where boats are not just toys, they are collateral. Most buyers assume that when they walk into a dealership and see a row of shiny boats on trailers, those boats are fully owned. The reality is harsher. Dealers rarely own that inventory outright. They finance it on what is called floor plan credit. In plain language, they borrow money to put those boats on their lot and pay interest on each hull every month until it sells. When you see how far the marketing is from the real numbers, it shifts the way you look at the transom. If this changes how you think about outboards, like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and let us know what outboard you own or would like to own in the comments below. One buyer, one boat, and an 84% surprise. Consider a fairly typical story, repeated in different forms in Florida, Texas, the Carolinas, and up into the Great Lakes. A buyer walks into a coastal dealership in early 2023 and falls in love with a 30-foot offshore center console from a well-known production brand. The sticker price is $95,000. He puts down a $10,000 deposit. At the time, the finance manager quotes him a marine loan around 6%. The payment estimate lands a little above $700 a month. He goes home, adds in roughly $150 a month for insurance, another $500 for a slip at the local marina, and some money for fuel and maintenance. It is a stretch, but his household income can handle it. Then the calendar keeps moving. Supply delays, parts shortages, and an overbooked factory push his build slot back again and again. 6 months, 12 months, 16 months. By the time delivery day finally arrives in the middle of 2024, the world looks different. His approved finance rate, once the bank actually runs his updated credit with current tables, comes back not at 6%, but at 11%. That pushes the loan payment above $1,100 per month. Insurance quotes that had lived around $1,800 a year now come back at more than $4,000. The marina has raised slip fees from $500 a month to $750. When he rebuilds the spreadsheet, his expected monthly cost goes from around $1,250 to something closer to $2,300, an increase of roughly 84% over what he believed he was signing up for when he placed the deposit. He tries to walk away. The dealer reminds him that backing out means forfeiting the $10,000 he has already paid and potentially facing legal action for breach of contract. Under pressure and not wanting a fight, he signs. 3 weeks later, the boat is back at the dealership gate. This time, he arrives not as a proud new owner, but with a file folder, an attorney, and a demand for a refund based on the argument that the financing environment had changed so dramatically that the spirit of the deal no longer matched the paper. The specifics of how that case ends matter less than the fact that stories like this multiplied across every major coastal market. Each one was devastating for the buyer. Each one also left the dealer with another unit back on the floor plan tab, aging under a rising interest clock. And the longer those boats sat, the more desperate the discounts became. Discounts at the auction yard and the buyers who still said no. To get out from under aging inventory, dealers turned to wholesale auctions and fire sale pricing with a level of urgency they had never faced before. Boats that were supposed to sell near full, suggested retail price during the pandemic, boom center consoles, pontoons, cruisers, even high-end wake boats were suddenly being pushed out the door at 15 to 25% below that level, sometimes even deeper, just to free up floor plan credit lines that were bleeding. Interest every day they sat unsold. For dealers, it was survival. For buyers, at least on paper, it looked like the buying window of a generation. Cash buyers, retirees, and anyone with very strong credit started circling the auction blocks. A boat that felt impossible in 2021, a $75,000 offshore hull, or a family pontoon with every option, was suddenly priced like a used trade-in. The listings spread fast through forums, social media, and marina gossip. And for a brief moment, it felt like a quiet feeding frenzy might start. But then the real numbers crept into the conversation. Insurance premiums that had doubled or tripled. Loan rates in the double digits. Marina slip fees climbing 15 to 25%. Fuel prices still high. Every buyer who paused long enough to add those numbers together began to understand why the discounts existed in the first place. The bargain boats were cheap because the cost of keeping them afloat was not. And for the buyers who did take the leap, Some discovered a different surprise waiting aboard, one not tied to interest rates or insurance tables. It sat glowing in the middle of their dashboards, freezing at odd moments, throwing sensor alerts, or refusing to sync with engines and chart plotters. The very technology that manufacturers used to justify higher prices and impress crowds at boat shows had quietly become another reason people were turning around and bringing their new toys back. When the screens started fighting back, boat shows in the early part of the decade looked more like consumer electronics expos than marine events. Massive integrated touchscreens, digital throttle and shift, networked global positioning system chart plotters, engine monitoring systems that talked to satellites. Salespeople would stand in a spotless cockpit, tap a gleaming multi-function display, and walk buyers through how everything from fuel burn to stereo playlists could be controlled from one glass panel. It looked futuristic, clean, and simple. Out on the water, on real weekends with real families, it was not always that simple. Screens froze. Bluetooth modules refused to pair. Global positioning system maps failed to update. Integrated engine monitors threw false alarms, dropping engines into guardian modes or flashing codes that dealers later shrugged off as software glitches. A single failed display might cost $3,000 to $5,000 to replace. A visit from a certified marine electronics technician could easily start at more than $1,000 in diagnostics, even if the underlying failure was covered under warranty. In some regions, wait times for that technician stretched 6 to 8 weeks during the busy season. Owners who had been told that all this technology was there to make boating easier felt blindsided when they discovered how fragile and expensive it really was. For buyers who had already swallowed higher than expected loan payments and insurance premiums, the realization that a single glitchy screen could add several $1,000s more to their cost pushed them over the edge. Some refused delivery after their very first service visit. Others simply parked the boat, made a few angry calls, and joined the growing line of people asking for their money back. The refund wave did not hit every segment of the market equally, though. Different slices of the industry bled for different reasons. How different buyers hit the wall in different ways. At the entry level, brands known for affordable aluminum fishing rigs and basic family runabouts saw the highest outright cancellations. These were buyers trying to get into a new boat under $50,000. Their budgets were tight. They often had limited prior boating experience. When payments came in $200 or $300 higher than promised, and insurance doubled, they were the first to walk away. Analysts quietly estimate that well over 2/5 of canceled orders during the peak of the refund wave came from this under $50,000 tier. In the mid-market, where boats priced between $60,000 and $150,000 live, the story sounded different. Buyers in this range had more income and better credit. They could often still technically afford the higher payments. What shocked them was depreciation. Models from respected brands, the kind of names that used to hold value like blue chips, started losing 20 to 30% on paper within 12 months of delivery. The combination of overproduction, forced dealer discounts, and a flood of slightly used low-hour boats from distressed owners turned the usual resale curve into a cliff. Some buyers simply refused to drive off that cliff. They let their orders reach completion, looked at the new market data, and refused to take delivery on a boat that would make them heavily underwater on their loan the very first day they owned it. At the high end, luxury yacht builders saw fewer transactions collapse, but the ones that did were spectacular. Wealthy buyers who had signed for 7-figure builds in the early pandemic years, when their portfolios were inflated and their time felt wide open, received delivery delay notices stretching toward 2 and 3 years. By the time those hulls were ready to ship, markets had corrected, taxes had risen, and some of those clients simply no longer saw the sense in adding a multi-million-dollar toy to their balance sheets. They walked away from 6-figure deposits rather than step into a vessel that might drop a similar amount in value before the first winter haul-out. Pontoons, the darlings of pandemic lake life, faced a quieter but equally sharp adjustment. Buyers who had imagined long summers at the sandbar discovered that storage, winterization, and lift costs on inland lakes were far higher than the friendly salesman had implied. Even center console fishing boats, which held their value better than most categories, saw an uptick in returns when new owners ran the numbers on offshore fuel burn, electronics upgrades, and specialized insurance required for long runs offshore. Across all of these slices, the conclusion was the same. For a growing number of people, the numbers no longer lined up with the dream, and behind those numbers were actual families, actually hurting. And when you watch an engine with this kind of flaw leave someone stranded, it's hard to unsee. Drop a like if you'd never trust this on your transom. Families caught between a dream and a bank statement. Behind every refunded boat is at least one uncomfortable conversation in a kitchen, at a dining room table, or on a late-night walk, where two people admit to each other that they made a mistake. A family in Michigan spends 2 years saving for a pontoon boat, around $38,000. They picture summers on the lake with their kids, fishing in the morning and tubing in the afternoon. When they place the order in 2022, a bank officer tells them that with their down payment and credit score, they should land around 5% interest. The payment estimate is about $370 a month. The boat shows up in 2024. Their updated approval comes back at 12%. The payment is now about $590 a month. That extra $220 is more than their grocery bill climbed over the same period. They are told they will lose an $8,000 deposit if they walk away. They take delivery. They use the boat twice. They sit down with their bank statements and finally admit they cannot make it work. 6 weeks after the first launch, they return to the dealer and negotiate a partial refund that still leaves them $4,000 poorer and without a boat. On the opposite coast, a couple in California stretches for a 32-foot coastal cruiser. They knew it was a reach, but they justified it as their shared midlife splurge. 3 months after delivery, the integrated navigation system fails. The dealer tells them the repair will run roughly $4,800 and that the warranty will not cover it because the failure has been categorized as user error. They have already emptied savings to cover the down payment and the first few high fuel weekends. There is nothing left to absorb a surprise like that. They list the boat for sale, accept a $15,000 loss, and still owe $12,000 after the sale, proceeds clear. Multiply these stories by thousands, and the phrase refund crisis stops feeling abstract. It becomes the sum of a lot of smaller, quieter crises in real households. And those crises do not stop at the buyers and the dealers. The shock begins to ripple out along the shoreline. When the slips started speaking, marinas that had waiting lists during the pandemic years began to notice a different kind of problem. Slips stayed open. Reservation calls slowed. Renewal payments showed up late, or did not show up at all. Dockmasters, who used to juggle angry customers begging for space, were suddenly staring at empty berths and quiet office phones. In a lot of regions, new slip reservations fell by roughly 1/3 between the early years of the decade and the middle of it. Some marinas reported clusters of abandoned boats, many of them less than 3 years old. Owners stopped paying, stopped answering emails, stopped taking calls. Hulls sat under tired tarps, collecting mildew and fines, while lawyers tried to sort out who legally owned them and who would pay to move them. Service centers that used to be booked 6 months ahead started seeing open bays. Winterization bookings dropped sharply. Mobile mechanics, who once drove from job to job with no break, now had days with nothing on the schedule. Fuel docks, tackle shops, charter guides, and waterfront restaurants all started talking about softer seasons. When more than 2 million boats fail to find or keep owners, the damage does not stay inside showrooms. It ripples into every fragile corner of the marine economy. Inside the industry, people do not argue about whether boating will survive. They argue about which path the waterfront is slowly choosing. In the more hopeful version, the reset, interest rates drift down, just enough that a boat stops feeling like a second mortgage. Typical marine loans slide back under something like 8%. Dealers clear out old inventory with honest discounts and stop ordering as if every year is a boom. Manufacturers trim production to match real demand. Insurance premiums flatten after a few quieter storm seasons. Auction prices for used boats rise for several months in a row, a sign that dealers are buying because they see resale, not because they are desperate. Refunds and cancellations drop back toward the low single digits. Marinas creep toward healthy occupancy again. In the darker version, the reckoning rates stay high. Floor plan costs crush the dealers who expanded too far. More of them quietly close or get absorbed. Some lenders step away from marine loans. Insurance either becomes painfully expensive or simply disappears from certain coasts. Repossessions stack up. Used values fall far enough that anyone who bought in the boom years feels trapped and burned. Right now, the slips are not full, and they are not empty. They are somewhere in between. And that in between is where the future of this whole business is being decided. If you walk a quiet marina at sunrise now, you see both futures at once. There are boats that will head out happily today, full of families who did the math and made it work. There are others sitting under faded covers, tagged for repossession, or stuck in legal limbo after a refund dispute. Each hull represents a promise that is either held or broken. More than 2 million of those promises have already snapped. Whether this becomes a lesson the industry learns from, or just the first fracture in something larger, depends on choices being made far away from the docks. If you want to keep seeing how those choices play out on the water, you know what to do next.